Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, depending on you are. I'm a researcher at the Biosemantics group in the Leiden University Medical Center, and I'm here to present you the CIMO, or the COVID-19 epidemiology and monitoring ontology. But first, let me start by the end, and let me provoke you and challenging you to think about how to enable precision intervention at individual level and at population level, making more interpretable epidemiological data. Why? Because interventions are very important if you want to be ready for future outbreaks. So to control in an outbreak, to control the number of deaths, the morbidity, and the number of infected persons, population, we need to contain these numbers using interventions. And epidemiology surveillance by means of measurements allow us to obtain evidence that inform these interventions in order to be efficient and rapid. When this outbreak goes pandemic, as the COVID-19 use case, the other challenge is that we need to share epidemiology surveillance data, these measurements, with other scientists, even maybe crossing borders in other countries, in other regions, and also crossing domains, integrating this data with other knowledge. But the problem is, as stated in this Nature article, that this pandemic demonstrated that for COVID-19, we lack of a tool for making this efficient epidemiology. There is no standard to make these measurements data more reusable, more interpretable, reliable, that fosters trust, and computable in order to make analysis, construct models, make predictions, and that allow us to make quick and informed interventions. So the question is how to enable this efficient epidemiology. So yes, ontologies. Ontologies are a good tool, known tool for that enable efficient research. The OVO-Finder, for example, contains more than 100 ontologies in the biomedical and biological scope, and that all are built as a foundation using this BFO, basic foundational ontology, and to make all these ontologies interpretable for analysis. So recently, there is this extended COVID-19 infectious disease ontology that is extended from its core infectious disease ontology that already contains these epidemic measures. We can see here that it contains like 20. And in the epidemiology domain, we had this EPO, or epidemiology ontology, for general epidemiology, but recently has been retired. So then here, the hypothesis was that what is blocking this efficient epidemiology is maybe the lack of structured measurements, measures terms, for this COVID-19 epidemiology surveillance to monitor the dynamics of the disease in populations. So the research question was to determine what is the status, the semantic status, the ontological representation in ontologies of these measurements, of these data for epidemiology surveillance. So here we had mainly two objectives: to assess and improve the ontological representation of these measurements for epidemiology. So the method, as I said, is mainly, or was mainly, to determine the status in OVO of these measurement terms and to develop a minimal formal model. So I would like to highlight that this is not a funded work. This was conceived and developed during open community by hackathons, mainly two last year, by hackathon for COVID-19 on March and by hackathon Europe on November, and early this year in the context of SWAT for the Less, the SWAT-a-thon. But even though we had a plan. So this plan consists, you can see on the right, this was a plan and consisted on this extraction of epidemiological terms for COVID-19 and to check the coverage in OVO, to evaluate with epidemiologists these terms, this list of terms, to refine it, and to evaluate if it was necessary with these terms to make action patterns to extend an ontology, an existing ontology, or to develop a new one. So here on the left, I'm showing you our first findings. We did this manual creation from preprint servers, so mainly MetaArchive, but also from public health surveillance official websites like CDC or the World Health Organization. And we extracted 138 terms, from which 100 were new terms, and 38 were already covered in OVO. So as you can see, we only had in OVO 30 low coverage, 30% coverage. So then we did next an evaluation, an analysis of how these terms, how these 38 terms are represented in OVO, or represented formally in OVO. And as you can see in this pie diagram, that not only we have a low coverage, but also it's very highly distributed in different ontologies, mainly in three: in Stato, here in red, the statistical analysis ontology, here in orange, highlight Apollo, also with high coverage, is an ontology for epidemic modeling, which makes sense, and in IDO, this infectious disease ontology, core ontology for COVID-19 IDO. So next was this evaluate how were formally described in this infectious disease ontology, these epidemic measurements, these 20 epidemic measurements, and they were surprisingly described as qualities. Like this triggered our decision, this plus that IDO wants to enrich the ontology with these epidemiology terms to develop a new ontology, to develop a new ontology in OVO. So we developed CIMO, represented in OWL, in order to make these terms machine readable and computable for analysis. And we use best practices. We reuse terms and models as much as possible. And formally, we use upper level ontologies. We also use, because we want to build an OVO ontology, so also to highlight that this ontology, CIMO, is under development. So we use the OVO principles in order to make an OVO ontology. And to formally modeling this, what we did was first to determine the scope and the domain of the ontology, describing some core concepts. Also, we added these missing concepts with these missing epidemic measurements as qualities, extending IDO. And we added action patterns to describe these core concepts, mainly GFO for timelines, for example. And we relate this epidemic measurement with action patterns, also relating it to these core concepts. And we developed this conceptual model for epidemic measurements to describe these epidemic measurements at population level. Here on the left, I show you the conceptual model. As you can see, we described these epidemic measurements as outputs of or observations from a process. These outputs are related, importantly, to the uncertainty, to foster trust for interpretation, and also it's related to the quality. as in IDO. And this quality is related to an entity that at population level can be population or cohort. This has a role that is realized into a process. So process is like the core concept of this model. And this model is based on an existing core model used to describe elements on patient registries for rare diseases. As you can see, it's mainly the same. The difference is that it's representing health data at patient level. It's also reused in the clinics in the IMC to describe observations and to monitor patients for COVID-19, and also was the base to develop this schema for measurements in the version 2 of PhenoPackets. So this core model that we reuse from this EGPRD project that uses this model to represent these elements in patient registries is also actually reusing a design pattern for measurements from the Semantic Science Integrated Ontology, or SIO. Also to highlight that this ontological model, what we did was extend the infectious disease ontology, and we mapped all these terms and relationships to OGO terms into IDO. So we described these epidemic measurements in the scope of the main core concepts, as I mentioned before, using these action patterns. And importantly, following a third recommendation, we added a link, an object property, to link patient and population. And we checked different data models for health data that link patient with cohorts, and based on the semantics finally of the GA4GH standard called PhenoPackets, we use this property in our relational ontology as member. Also to remark that this ontology is available in GitHub for community reuse. So finally, to say that we are filling this gap, adding new 100 concepts for epidemiology surveillance for COVID-19, that this new ontology follows good practices on knowledge engineering, that we are making compatible measurements at level of population for epidemiology and also at level of patient real-world observations, that this is computable and interpretable for analysis in the biomedical research, and that enables these measurements, this data, to be reusable, to be reliable, and to be computable for efficient epidemiology. Limitation. It needs evaluation because we are mixing, integrating two upper-level ontologies built in two different philosophical views. And for future, we would like to be more expressive in representing informally population and patient link. So in the end, we provide a new ontology that is called SIMO, this new ontological representation that hopefully will enable efficient epidemiology. And I would like that I convinced you that reusing a design pattern, reusing a model, we enable this interoperability, this communication between to leverage health data at patient level and health data at population level to enable rapid and precise intervention. So I would like to thank to all my co-authors, contributors during hackathons, and the funding institutions, IMC, the EGPRD, a COVID-19 Dutch national project, the Biohackathon organizers, and the ISMB organizers. So kindly allow me to present this nice work, to the Bio-Ontologies audience. And well, I hope that you find this talk interesting, and you have a lot of questions, and I'm ready to answer. Thank you so much.